Hello, friends, and welcome to Doug Reads with Friends. On this podcast, I invite a friend to choose a book, which we both read in advance, and then they come on the podcast for a fun conversation about their lives, our friendship, and the book that they chose. I started this podcast because I've got really wonderful friends from all over the world, and I miss them. The podcast is really an excuse for me to have a wonderful conversation with a friend that I love and dearly miss, and to talk about an interesting book that I probably otherwise wouldn't have read. On today's podcast, I am talking with Jeff Yamada. Jeff is a wonderful friend of mine that I have known for over 30 years. As we talk about extensively in this podcast, our friendship started when we were in the same cohort of Peace Corps volunteers in Suriname in the mid-1990s. Both of us were married at the time. We're both married now, but to different people. So this conversation is an exploration of those decades of friendship, our experiences in Peace Corps, our experiences on the board of the Lutheran Volunteer Corps together, both of us being divorced, and the book that Jeff chose, When No Thing Works by Norma, Wong. Jeff is a wonderful person. I really enjoyed this conversation with him, and I hope that you'll enjoy it as well. There are some friendships that you can name the exact date on which you met. Jeff Yamada is one of those friends for me. September 25, 1995, the day in which Jeff and I and how many other, maybe 14 other people joined Peace Corps Suriname as the first group of volunteers in Peace Corps Suriname. We met in Miami, where we were for our pre-service training for a couple of days, and then we all flew down to Suriname. We were there for a couple of years together. Jeff and his then wife Raquel stayed on for a third year, but we've maintained a friendship now for 30 plus years, but grounded in that Peace Corps experience. So, Jeff, first of all, welcome to Doug Reads with Friends, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, Doug. I went through my closet. I couldn't find it, but I thought it'd be really funny because I have a Lutheran Volunteer Corps t-shirt and I've got a Peace Corps t-shirt, and I was going to have those ready. But
do you really? You still have an old Peace Corps t-shirt?
I did,
that's an artifact.
Yeah, but I don't know where it is now. So
yeah, I have a Peace Corps Suriname mug, which I discovered in my mom's kitchen the last time I was visiting her, buried deep. And it was buried so deep in the kitchen that it's in really good shape. And it has the Peace Corps slogan, the toughest job you'll ever love, translated into Sranantongo on it. So let's start maybe with Peace Corps then, because that was the genesis of our friendship. When you look back on the Peace Corps experience now, what comes to mind? What images immediately come up? Like, how does that live in your mind today, a long time ago now for us?
Yeah, I carry that experience with me all the time. I think it was probably one of the best things I ever did with my life. I was working at a financial firm in operations, and it was such a huge shift back to the things that I always loved. As a kid, every career assessment said I was going to be a forest ranger.
Really?
Yeah. Living out there, isolated in this village with these amazing people we lived and worked with. I was a Native American Studies, I have one class short of a minor in college, and I was living in a Native village, and just seeing the impact of modernity, impact of colonialism, up close and personal in a tragic way, seeing how resilient people were in trying to maintain their culture and their language. And it was just an amazing experience. And I, to this day, anything needs to be done. I need a tool. It's like, I don't necessarily need a hammer if there's a rock around. If there's something hard, like anything is a tool. And that goes professionally. It's just a really great way of being flexible and looking at the world in a different way.
We should maybe go back just a step. What was your job, Bob, in big quotes, in Peace Corps? Talk a little bit about the village that you were placed in and what were you doing there?
So we were in a village called Konomaruma Donderskamp. It was an Amerindian village in the rainforest. There were no roads. Only accessible by water. We were about 100 miles, probably less than that as a crow flies from the coast. But it was so low, was all like basically the Amazon spills out and all that silt comes up and washes up in Suriname. So there's this long coast of mangrove swamps between us and the ocean. We were miles and miles from the ocean, but when the tide changed, our river would change direction. So it was Arawak and Cariña peoples who lived there. They had a Catholic school. They were taught in Dutch, the national language. The chief time, Ferdinand Mandé, he talked about remembering being beaten for speaking his native language in school. It was coming out of a civil war, so it was interesting. There was still a lot of barter economy. There wasn't a lot of money passing through the village, though. So it was very much community based. Somebody would go out fishing, they'd have more fish than they could eat, and it would just get dispersed. And if we had something that people needed, as Westerners, often someone was sick and needed to get to town. So for Peace Corps, we had emergency gasoline was required to have, and we weren't supposed to give it to anybody. But if somebody's sick, then they'll get it back to you. And so it was, there's an airfield that had grown over so that you couldn't fly in. There was a clinic where they had a medical worker there who was like a nurse's assistant, maybe training equivalent. The only contact with town was through a two-way radio, and they would turn that on once a day and check in. So it was very, very, very isolated.
What did you think you were signing up for when you joined Peace Corps? And how did that compare to what you actually got? And you can answer that either from the perspective of like what you were doing there, what the experience was, or what did you think you would get out of this, and what did you actually get out of this?
Raquel's mother was a Peace Corps volunteer, was in Thailand in the 60s, and she taught in a school. So Raquel wanted to be a Peace Corps volunteer, and I did too. Peace Corps, with my MBA, they wanted to send me to Eastern Europe. This was 1994 when we applied, right? So they had all these volunteers going out to, make a market economy out of the Eastern Bloc, which, God, I didn't do that. And they were like, "Oh, we'll find something for your wife to do." And my wife, and she's like,
that's not going to work.
A job, yeah. So, and then it was also, we were living in New York City, and we decided somewhere without snow would be nice. We're both from Southern California, and just it would be nice not to have snow. And Eastern Bloc, Mongolia was offered. No. So we ended up in this program, and I did not know what to expect. And turns out Peace Corps did not know what to expect either, because they just threw us out there and called us rural community development volunteers, which is go out there and figure out something to do, find out what they need, teach them some basic skills around community building, which, they have tons of skills around community building. But it was more teaching them how to interface with Western culture, Western expectations, more than anything. And that was great. It was so much more than I could have ever imagined. Just the lack of structure. I think we thrived in the lack of structure because we were able to just make friends, integrate with the community, and just, still, like, I called my next door neighbor, Bierman, Harold. You've met. So I called it. His birthday was in April. So, I talked to him for his birthday, and his daughter and I are on Facebook often, just checking in with each other. And Raquel still goes there. Raquel got her dissertation, on endangered languages. So yeah, we still have connection to the village, and it was just more than I could have hoped for.
So Anne and I got to come visit you and Raquel for a week in your village. At some point, we've got to tell the mud story. Oh, I think this is the right moment for it. It's one of our favorite stories from 30 years of friendship. I have vague memories of mud.
You'll have to post that picture.
As an outsider, I think maybe you have more concrete or detailed memories than I do of that.
Well, you visited on a lunar eclipse night, and so the moon turned red. And the moon turns red, you don't go outside, you don't go out in the moon, but just in case you did, you got to wash with mud and get mud all over you and wash the mud off to take the blood from the moon off of you. My next door neighbor, Cecilia, who my daughter's named after, Cecilia loved when there was a lunar eclipse. She had her bucket of mud ready. Anyone who passed her house just got pelted with mud. It was this massive mud fight, and you and Anne were there. We were all covered with mud. It was hilarious. And we had the river right there, so you just jump in the river and wash off afterwards. But yeah.
I have this memory of seeing her running at me laughing hysterically, her arm coming back to throw, and then just seeing this clump of mud coming at me. And that's kind of the end of that memory, because the large clump of mud hit me full in the face. I think I went down. I think it knocked me over, and my face was absolutely 100% covered in mud. And then hearing her cackling with laughter afterwards, being hit full in the face with a large clump of mud during a blood moon in Suriname is not something that I will ever forget. That is for sure.
Well, I have that picture of it, and you actually look like you're a little concussed.
I might have been. So as I was thinking about this, I was trying to think back about memories that I have of Jeff in Peace Corps. And one of the things that I noted down quickly was Jeff got bitten by a piranha while we were in Peace Corps. So can you tell him that story? I mean, this is just going to turn into two old guys tell stories about Peace Corps in the 1990s. Welcome, listeners. This is your life for the next 10 minutes.
So we're on the boat. I'm fishing with Chief and his brother-in-law, and it's a couple-day trip. You go out in the forest, you build a shelter, and you go, set nets, and in the morning you take the fish up. So we're hauling the fish up from the net, and the captain's steering the boat, and I'm pulling the net up and putting the fish in the boat, and then we're taking the fish out of the net. And I've got this net with fish in it, and I hold them up so the captain could see. And I said, "What kind of fish are these?" And he says, "Oh, those are pacu," which looks exactly like piranha, but it's vegetarian, doesn't bite. Grab one pacu out of the net, put it in the boat, go to grab the other pacu, and the thing bit me. And really, like this finger, like a big chunk out of this finger, and there's just blood just like flowing. I said, "That wasn't a pacu." And the captain looked at me and goes, "No, that was a piranha." Not laughing, just like, "No, that was a piranha." Put a t-shirt on and wrap it up. Then we go paddling off, and there are these things growing out of the river, about the stalks are about this big around, and they've got a triangular leaf on top. And they grab a stalk, cut one of those off. And this is Freco, his brother-in-law. And Freco cuts the stalk, opens it up, squeezes out the juice, takes the wrapping off my finger, pours the juice onto it, and wraps my finger back up. And it just instantly stopped the bleeding. And it stung. So it must have been some antiseptic too. So did that. Then we paddle to the shore, get out of the boat, walk up into the forest where it would kind of a clearing in. So they must have cut something down because there were these really fast growing trees there. And these trees kind of look like an asparagus as far as it's just a stalk with no leaves on the side, and the leaves come out of the very top. And the very, very top, it's like pressed together where all the new leaves are coming up. We cut down this tree. It was, maybe just big around and, 20 feet tall, cut it down. He takes the very, very top of this where the leaves are all just coming out, opens that up and gets out to right at the part where all the leaves that are generating from, scrapes out the pulp, opens my bandage back up, sticks the pulp on my finger, and then we wrap it again. And he says, "When it falls off, your finger's healed." Finish fishing, the next day we go back and, I go to the clinic because I'm like, this guy just did this. And the guy in the clinic says, "Okay, well, what happened?" Recount that story, and he goes, "Oh, yeah, when it falls off, your finger's healed. There's nothing better I can do for it." The wild thing is it got stinky, it finally fell off. It regenerated the flesh around my finger. Like I thought I would have like a big scar and a big hunk. And it's amazing how well it healed. And Dr. Legeman said the same thing. He's like, "Yeah, that's bush medicine, and yeah, there's nothing better you can do for it." So that was a cool story.
You mentioned earlier you've got an MBA. I'm going to do an MBA, and then going to the Peace Corps is not a typical path.
So I was working at a Swiss bank in New York, and I was just feeling like I wasn't on an advancement track. I was my boss loved me and kept recommending me, but her boss kept shutting it down. So I just thought, might as well get my MBA. I mean, the company pays for it. So I had to be like in Europe trading hours. So I'd be in at like 7 or 6. I'd get into work. I'd work until 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and then I'd take the train out to Queens from, I guess, 7 to 10. I'd go to school and then come back. And it was an MBA of finding a way to advance myself when it wasn't happening at my job. And, it's come in handy. Unfortunately, it was more like a box to check than some, like, it launched me in any particular direction. I think it helped when I was going for jobs later and I had the MBA, but it was more about what I could do ever than it was the MBA, but it, got me in the door.
Were there skills from the MBA that you used in a small Amerindian fishing village in the wilds of Suriname for 3 years?
I would have loved were that the case. I wanted to write my thesis on microbanking, and I could not find an advisor to support me in that. It was St. John's, which was more of like very traditional. They didn't have anybody outside the box there and no one would, I couldn't find anyone to support me. So I did have a fascination with microbanking and I read up a lot and I did a lot of work in it outside of my MBA, but no, I don't think my MBA particularly helped me with that. I mean, it conceptually with a lot of my jobs later, it helped me, but not really now, unfortunately.
So another phase of our friendship or part of our friendship was that I was on the national board of Lutheran Volunteer Corps and we were meeting and said, we really need someone with a finance background to come in and help. And I said, I've got the perfect guy. I know a Peace Corps volunteer with an MBA. And they said, that's a unicorn. Let's get him. And so I asked you and you said yes. And you joined me on the board. And very quickly after that, I left and moved, brought you in and walked away. But we got to go to at least a few meetings together. So why did you say yes? And what was the LVC board experience like for you?
I said yes because you asked me and because you told me, well, I'm not a Lutheran. I'm not a religious person at all. And that was the other thing I was worried about. Like, because evangelicals and I do not generally get along. And it was sort of a time in my life that it really fit. It was good training. I learned a lot. I grew a lot by staying there for so long and I ended up being the chair for a few years. It was a great non-parenting, financial planning way to look at the world and look at nonprofit organizations. I learned a ton and just wonderful people. Oh man, the people on that board were amazing. And that's another thing you said was when you were pitching me was that just amazing people on the board. And that was absolutely true.
Another part of our friendship is that you and Raquel divorced a couple of years before Anne and I divorced. Mm-hmm. And you were in many ways a mentor to me and a good friend who kind of walked me through this and said, this is painful and awful, but it's going to be all right. And you're going to come out on the other side.
Yeah.
This is something that is hard, but you can do it. What do you remember of those conversations?
I remember the care with which you approached it, your concern to make sure that Anne was going to be okay, the collaborative way that you two work together. People will, in their divorce, work out their emotional issues through the finances, so, and you were really able to not do that, which is commendable. Yeah. So I do remember that. And I remember being sad for the both of you. And, you both remain my friends.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. It strikes me as I'm also still friends with Raquel. You remain friends with Anne today. Does that strike you as unusual, or do you think that that's just a function of the way that we all met and the experiences that we had in Suriname in the 90s?
I think for me, we were old enough that we were able, we each had our individual friendships. It wasn't like couple friendships. So, we each had our own connection outside of coupledom. We would come into town for things and sometimes I would be there and Raquel wouldn't, or Raquel would be there and I wouldn't. And so we would talk to you guys at different times, or we each had friendships. It wasn't a couples thing. I didn't feel that way.
So now today, both of us have remarried. You have described to me before the life that you and your wife are building now and the project that you're working on. I would struggle to define it myself if I had to say it back because it's been a year or two since you said it to me. I would use the words Indigenous wisdom, ecology, plant-based therapy in some order and probably get part of that wrong. And I hope a piece or two of it right. So can you talk that through a little bit of kind of what is it that the two of you are building and what are the ideologies that are pushing you forward?
So Maribel, my wife, has a nonprofit. She started a nonprofit. I'm like the super volunteer in the background who I don't have a position, but I do a lot of stuff. The goal of the nonprofit is land-based healing and connection to land, which indigeneity, I don't want that to be interpreted into like being tribal or native or, we are all indigenous if you go back far enough. And indigenous means that we all had connection to land. So our normal now is not the normal the way the humans existed on the planet for the 20, 30,000 years before that, right? So I don't think it's normal to sit in front of a desk all day. I don't think our bodies are attuned to that. And we see a lot of younger people, especially, but they're very disconnected from the world. They're in front of these boxes, and there's a lot of harm that comes of that. So connecting to the land is a major way to help heal people, to calm the nervous system, to downregulate. And there are a lot of people who don't have access to that. Like I grew up in a upper middle class family, and we would go camping and have all these great vacations. And there are a lot of people that access is not there. So we do nature-based programs for Black, Indigenous people of color, queer groups, sort of the marginalized communities. We have 36 acres in the forest, and we built campgrounds, and we have programs that we run. And I have people. So I never had a real strong connection to religion as a organized religion. I think to me, spirit speaks in all these different ways, and in no way spirit's going to speak to everybody in the world and tell them your one way of doing things is the right way and everybody else is wrong. So it's been diving through, what is that core message? And a lot of it is that the world around us is not a bunch of things. Trees are beings. You just have to honor that you cut down a tree for firewood, then you're taking the life of that tree and you're using it for someone else, but you're thanking that tree, you're making an offering to that tree and saying. So I'm going back to Peace Corps, Doug. When I was in the Peace Corps, if you were sitting with people eating, they would get their plate, and the first thing they'd do is they take a little food off their plate and throw it on the ground. If you handed them a drink, the first thing they would do is pour a little drink on the ground because you're giving back to the earth. And it's that sense of connection that I think we have lost that allows us to, environmentalists are worried about saving the planet, right? But it's about if you have a connection to the planet, it makes it a lot harder to waste, and it makes it a lot harder to misuse, throw trash on the ground, throwing trash on the ground, or over harvesting or overusing, and then just moving on to the next plot of land. There's only so much you can do. And I think that's a big challenge of what we're running into now. And so a lot of it is helping people get a different connection to the land and the living beings around them just so that they can act better.
It makes me think that you figured out a way to be a forest ranger after all.
Yeah, seriously. I am so happy here.
So if people want to learn more about this or make a donation or explore the opportunity more, how would they do that?
So it's liberationpathways.org. That's the best way to see what the organization is doing. And actually, the book I chose has to do with how do you reimagine a world. How do you direct yourself to that?
Let's start to make that transition. What was the book that you chose, and why did you choose this book for this conversation?
So the book is When No Thing Works by Norma Wong. And I had been, one of my best friends, Shandine Garcia, hooked me up with some people to, we're men's groups. I was thinking about starting a men's group, and this guy was in this network. I think it was called Collective Acceleration. Turns out Shandine was also in that group. And Collective Acceleration is this group formed around Norma's ideas. It also fits in with when I would read in Native American studies that a common, it's not one specific tribe, but a lot of the Native peoples here talked about Turtle Island in the U.S., thinking about 7 generations idea. Okay, so when you take an action, you think back 7 generations of the wisdom that has been given to you, and you think 7 generations past you for what impact your action is going to take. So you kind of hold the past and the distant future. It's kind of like a 140-year time frame for how you impact the world around you. So the imagining, how do you get to that? how do you get to that 140 years from now, right? What do you do now? Because this time we're in, we feel so stuck. Everything's so big, everything's so overwhelming that it's hard to find a place to start. Like, what am I going to do that's going to impact, move the needle? And it feels like, we're so small, nothing is going to move the needle. So the concept is that you tell a story about what are your great, 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 great grandchildren, what's their life going to be like, and what would you want their life to be like? And from that story, I think in the book she talks about there's a meeting at in Hawaii, and they were talking about development, and they were talking about what they want to see in the future. And one of the mayors, he talked about, it's this day, and I get in my car, and my daughter and I go to the beach, and we pull up to the beach, and we park right at the beach, and immediately everybody starts laughing because and then they get out and they go into the beach, and there's these group of tourists there who are doing, and there's a word for it, and I don't remember, but which is the reciprocity, basically. So the tourists, as part of their tourist commitment on the island, are there cleaning the beach as part of their connection to the island and their participation. And it goes on about the food, but it's this idea of like, yeah, what does that story look like for my descendants? And then what am I doing now to turn my life and the people around me and just make that example of like, how do we get there?
Early on in this book, first chapter or two, I had a very strong reaction and wrote down in my notes, I don't know what I just read. Like there are parts of this book that it's very philosophical in nature. It's very circuitous in nature. It's written by a woman for whom oral history, oral tradition is very, very important. And the idea of putting these ideas and philosophies down into writing to making this a book, it translates well at times. The other times when, wow, I'm not quite sure what those ideas were. At least that was my experience. Was that your experience as well? Or did you click right into this book immediately?
No, and another reason why this is probably my third time through it. Yeah, absolutely. And she also is a poet, and I have found reading poets turned authors that it can be hard for me to grasp what they're writing because it's as much of a poem as it is prose sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. And there's like, what? That I would have never strung those 5 words together. What did that just mean? Yeah, absolutely.
If I can give an example of that, I pulled one quote. This is on page 39. She writes, the scientists who rebirthed in the embrace of an ancient wisdom, informing the future void. Let me read that again because it sounds like that doesn't make any sense. And I still struggle to really comprehend what she means, but the scientists who rebirthed in the embrace of an ancient wisdom, informing the future void. I thought I can read that sentence 12 times and I'm still not going to understand exactly what she means by that. And in some ways that was troubling to me. And then in some ways I thought, you know what? There's a lot of sentences in the world I don't understand. Like there can be forms of wisdom that I just don't have access to. I mean, if I was reading something by a particle physicist, I could read that 12 times and never understand it as well, right? And that it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It doesn't mean that it's not wise. It just means that my brain, my cultural experience, my way of understanding the world, my training, my smarts are different than her. And that I can try to learn from her. But if I went and sat in a class on particle physics, I'd be equally as lost as I was at parts of this book. And at least there were parts of this book that resonated with me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and that was also a weird sentence for me, but then I had to, and probably the second time through, I had to reflect, oh, she's telling a future story here. So she's talking not people trained in science today, but in the future, people will be trained in science to take in the ancient wisdom. So like these future scientists are looking at the world in a different way in order to fill the future void in like how they're moving forward in the future. It's not this apartness that I was talking about earlier. Where science is everything is a part, it's a particle, and so our society, you take everything apart and look at the individual components, and you don't look at how the whole works a lot of times. And like medicines, you strip out, you find the active ingredient, of the medicine, where in some medicines there are other ingredients that may not be as active, but they may have properties that enhance or change the medicine in some way. Yeah, so that's the future story that she's telling, at this future time, and where scientists are trained in a different way, I guess.
Yeah. Well, thank you for unpacking that for me. That's clearly a part that you were able to pick up on.
Not the first time.
That passed me by. What are the pieces of this book that resonate the most with you? And are there parts of this book that didn't land for you as well?
Well, I think it was hard to for the reasons you're saying. It was a hard read for me because I had to keep going around in circles, and I don't like doing that. I like to read a book and it'd be good and like tear through it. And this took me more time. I think the best part of it for me was at the end of it, I tried to build this story, and I wrote out this future story for my kids and what the world is like. And it actually has really helped me. Body's work came before this book, but it really helps me make sense and helps me feel like I'm a better steward of this organization and the way we want to move. And when our board is getting together and we're having discussions, I feel like I have a better picture. It's a sense of alignment into where we're going, because, that's the direction I'm going. There was another quote I wanted to talk to you about, just that there's another philosopher, Bayo Okomolafe. I don't know if you've heard of him, but
I have not.
So one of the things about this book is that it's kind of acknowledging that things are not really great right now. And Bayo Okomolafe was talking about the same thing. He talks about building in the cracks of, like, there's cracks in the sidewalk. You'll see like weeds and stuff coming up in the cracks. He said, it's time to start building in the cracks of this society that's having these ruptures. We need to find these ruptures and then build something to grow in these cracks so that there's going to be something there when it, falls apart, basically. And her work is very similar to that.
If we could transport this book back to the mid-90s and give it to Jeff in Peace Corps, how do you think that encountering these ideas might have impacted your Peace Corps experience back then?
I think it would have enhanced it. It would have given me a framework around my Peace Corps experience. It probably would have made me a better volunteer for talking to people in the village, because I don't think these ideas would be super foreign to them. It would be good. It would have been good to frame the projects that we were working with, the decisions we were making, that helping them make around this idea of sustainability for them, because there were always people coming to log, always people coming to really hit and run and extract and then run away. But they were pretty aware of it, though. I mean, it wasn't foreign to them. But it may have helped me build more sustainable projects. It may help me get more buy-in for sustainability if I were talking on this 7-generation arc, like beyond us and right now, and who's getting what and what family's advantage. Like, how do you want to move this whole village forward? And that may have helped. Yeah. How about you?
For me, I don't know that I was mature enough in the mid-90s. We were so young. Yeah. I mean, I think you and Raquel are 5-6 years older than us. We were very young, very green. I think, I struggled with this book now in terms of, like, my lived experience is very different from Norma's.
Yeah.
And she's very, very wise, but there's not a lot of overlap in our lives. There are parts of this book that really resonated with me today, but I can see why you wanted to reread this book. I think that it's a philosophical book. It's not a religious book, but and like you, I don't subscribe to kind of an organized religion, but I know that for a lot of people, religious texts, they get something different out of it every time that they return to it, right? They find whatever they need in their lives at that moment in that book. Mm-hmm. I can see how this book would be really similar. Right? That there are things that resonated with me now today that I really like, that thinking about, as you said, this kind of long-term, what do I want my future story to be? How do I get there? If I'm thinking 7 generations ahead, et cetera, that resonates with me now. I think back in Peace Corps, that would not have resonated with me. I was too young and too green at that time, but I think I'd have a hard time pointing out what might have resonated with me back then. But I have a feeling that if I had read this book 30 years ago, parts of it would have resonated with me that are different today. And I hope to read this book 30 years from now. And I think that I would gain something very different from it at that point as well.
In my 62nd year, right, it definitely resonates differently. Like post, empty nest, several years ago, the Western idea of retirement has no real allure to me because it's like you stop working and then you play, so I'm thinking of like, what is my, other than being a parent, which is a big thing, what is my statement to the world? What is my gift to the world? How do I want to say make myself useful, but how do I help steer us to a better place?
One of the ideas I think may have resonated with me then, and I think probably I certainly saw it in your village and the way that you talked about it, and maybe with the Liberation Pathways Project as well, is she talks about this idea of aloha as generational interdependence. She talks about it as a mutual aloha as a condition where each person matters to every other person for collective existence. Do you think we experienced a mutual aloha either as a group of volunteers in Suriname or with our villages, or is that me just romanticizing it here decades on?
No, I think any community like that, we were very tight knit. We would come down together, rely on each other, advice and what was going on in the village. You're isolated with your spouse, so it's nice to have another person to bounce something off of, So that idea of, one of the things that Mai talks about is creating the modern village, and that we don't have village anymore. It's so challenging, Doug, because in the village, you had people who were there, families for generations that were going to be in the village. Everybody belonged to the village. The weird ones, the mean ones, the nice ones, everybody was in the village, and everyone was tolerated. You belonged. And that's mutual connection. Aloha is very much the experience of being in the village. Even people you didn't like or didn't trust, you couldn't ghost them. They would still show up to your party and you would still show up to their party, right? So how do you build a community where there's no trust? You can't be doing active harm to people, but people are not always going to be perfect. No one's going to be perfect. So how do you build that aloha? It is really challenging, especially in the way we are now, where there's so many people, we can just choose to like not deal with a hard thing, not deal with a hard thing of healing, repair, or forgiveness. You cannot deal with those things because they're hard, and you can just turn and go somewhere else, find a new friend, find a new group, find a new find a new community. It's so easy to be portable and not do the work that you need to do for the relationship and for yourself, because like if you don't face the pain, you're not going to grow. So yeah, it's a beautiful concept, and that's that. Like, how do you get there?
It's one of the ideas that I've carried with me since finishing the book.
Yeah.
Of this idea of mutual interdependence, of everyone is in my community, and trying to think about everyone that I meet, everyone that I connect with. But you're right, in the village, you've got to do it. In my day-to-day life, I don't have to do it. It has to be a choice that I have to make. And it's so easy to choose not to engage with people who are on the fringes, are on the margins, are people that I don't like, who are weird, who, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But yet there's a beauty in the humanity of choosing to engage with those people rather than choosing to exclude them from your life in some way.
Mari likes to say, and this comes from Gabor Mate, I think, when you have a reaction about someone or something, what is it saying about you? What are you making that mean about you? And it's work.
Any other thoughts you want to share about this book, or topics you wanted to raise, or things you want to make sure that we talked about?
Only in that there are groups. So Collective Acceleration has some things, and there's a group called Resonance Network, which is another one. But there are these groups out here of people who just get together and hash out what governance looks like, hash out what community looks like. And I will first admit, I have not joined any of them yet. There's one coming up in June. I'm like, I finally think it always happens during the workday. it's hard for me, trades going on, clients calling, but I think I do need to carve out some time for one of these.
So other than Norma Wong's next book, what else are you going to be reading soon?
Well, I read something like this, and then I'm like, I have to find something else. Louise Erdrich, I don't know if you've read much of her, but I know she's always got new books coming out. She wrote The Roundhouse. That was on a lot of college curricula, but she's an Ojibwe writer, fantastic writer. But probably something like that. Murakami, I know there's a couple of his that I haven't read yet. So I love novels. But right now, I've got 5 or 6 books open on my desk. I've got books on farming and gardening and, like so many books.
That's not a bad thing.
No, it's great.
That's wonderful. Well, Jeff, one of the things I like to do towards the end of the conversation is to imagine, and we can imagine a future world like Norma says that we should, but maybe not not 7 generations. Maybe we can imagine a world where 7 generations from now, our children, our grandchildren are still meeting. That would be wonderful. I would love that for them. But let's think about where you and I might meet next, maybe informed by this book or inspired by this book. Do you have any future version of ourselves that you hope will meet up thinking about this book in mind?
Well, you are always welcome on here, Doug, just so you know.
I'd love to visit. It'd be wonderful.
Yeah, we'd love to have you here. I can think of places we would meet up not informed by this book because...
Sure. Well, let's go with that then. And then we can carry the spirit of the book with us as we
Yeah. What would be really cool, Doug, is to meet up in Suriname. That would be
I agree.
That would be.
It would be. And I think that we can bring the ideas from this book. As we said, how we experienced this book 30 years ago or today is very different. How we experienced Suriname 30 years ago or today, given our life experiences and everything, would be very, very different. And we can go back and maybe Cecilia can throw some more mud at me.
Yeah, we'll go back on a lunar eclipse.
That's great. Jeff, thank you so much. You have been such a wonderful friend to me for 3 decades now. And whether it was Peace Corps or LVC or as a divorce mentor, you're someone who I treasure, who I love and adore and think so highly of. So thank you so much for being my friend and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. Thank you for inviting me. And it's really been a wonderful time. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much to my good friend, Jeff Yamada, for coming on the podcast and for choosing a really interesting book, When No Thing Works, which I absolutely would not have read without this. And as I said, it's a book that I really learned from, gained a lot from, and I really think I'll return to it time and time again in the future. One thing we didn't mention is that it's a very short book. I think it's under 90 pages. So it's a book packed with ideas, but not one that's going to take you a long time to read. I really recommend that you seek out this book and think about how the philosophies in it might impact your own life. I hope you'll consider sharing this podcast with a friend, maybe someone who has been with you through lots of different eras of your life. Maybe somebody you think would like this book or benefit from reading it, or it's somebody that you want to read this book with yourself. Please join Doug Reads with Friends on social media. I'm on Instagram and on TikTok and have a Facebook page. It's a great place for you to see clips of shows and share the show with your friends. Music for Doug Reads with Friend by my friend, Eiren Caffall. Eiren is a deeply talented musician and author herself. Please check out her music on Spotify, and I really appreciate her support of the podcast. That's it for this episode of Doug Reads with Friends. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another friend and another book. Please join us then, and thank you for being my friend.